The scoutship Eternal Dominion dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of what hegemony charts called uninhabited space. Commander Vreth Cow stood at his observation deck and studied the convoy on his screens. 17 ships, slow, old-looking by Galactic standards, moving in a tight cluster through the cold dark between star systems like a group of lost travelers who had no idea how far they had wandered from home. What are they? His navigation officer asked. Vreth Cow read the scan report twice. Carbon-based life forms, oxygen breathers, bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, skin with no natural armor plating, no energy shielding on the ships, no quantum communication arrays. The weapon signatures were almost sad. Chemical propellant launchers and early generation directed energy weapons that the hegemony had phased out 6 centuries ago. Humans, his science officer said, they match the profile from the old Kefdar survey records. Young species, they have barely left their home system. Vreth Cow had heard of humans. Everyone in the hegemony had heard of humans the same way you heard about insects in a garden. Present, unimportant, easy to remove if they became a problem. Are they in hegemony? Claimed space, technically yes. Sector 7 was claimed during the 3rd expansion. These creatures would have no record of that claim. They do not have the technology to receive our broadcast treaties. Vreth Cow folded 2 of his forearms behind his back. The Kefdar survey records were 200 years old. These humans had apparently made it to this corridor of space on their own. Primitive ships, primitive weapons, soft bodies. He thought about what the hegemony required of species found in claimed space. There was a protocol. It was simple. It had been applied 400 times in the history of the Empire, and it had never once failed. Hail them, he said, on the human colony ship Perseverance. Captain Yale Akefer was eating a cold sandwich at her command station when the alien signal came through. It was not a language her translator recognized. It arrived on frequencies that human ships did not normally monitor. Her communications officer, a young man named Diaz, caught it only by accident while running a routine sweep. Cap, he said, we have got something weird. Akefer put down her sandwich. The signal was high frequency, mathematically structured and repeating. Her ship's AI spent 14 seconds analyzing it and produced a rough translation. You are in territory belonging to the eternal hegemony of the convergent stars. You have no right of passage here. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with total destruction. This is your only warning. She read it 3 times. She picked up her sandwich again and finished it. Diaz, she said, get me Fleet Commander Torres on the new Carthage. Torres appeared on screen 30 seconds later. He was a broad man with gray at his temples and the particular tired look of someone who had been managing 40,000 colonists across 17 ships for the past 8 months. His eyes already had the message in them before she said a word. I saw it, he said. We are a long way from backup, she said. Yes, you think they mean it. Torres looked off screen for a moment. When he looked back, his face was settled, decided. Yale, in the entire history of first contact situations, how many times has the alien with the bigger guns been bluffing? She thought about it. The silence was its own answer. Right, she said. Battle stations What Vrethka saw next confused him. The human convoy did not power down, it did not scatter, it did not freeze, which was the most common response when primitive species received the hegemony. Greeting, a paralysis born of pure shock. That usually lasted long enough for boarding parties to deploy without resistance. Instead, the 17 ships rearranged themselves. The largest vessels moved to the outside of the formation, the smaller ships tucked in. Behind them, the convoy transformed from a loose traveling cluster into a tight defensive shell in under 2 minutes. They were forming up for combat. They cannot be serious, Radika said. The Eternal Dominion was a hegemony cruiser class warship. It was 4.2 km long. Its particle lance batteries could cut a moon in half on a sustained burn. It had survived 3 full-scale fleet engagements in the past century without a single hull breach. The largest human ship was roughly 800 m. Its weapons, according to the scan, would not have scratched the Dominion's hull plating under any realistic engagement scenario. They must be hoping to negotiate from a show of force, his science officer said. A bluff hailed them again. Torres received the second message on the New Carthage's bridge. His crew was at stations. The convoy had formed up. Everyone was calm in the specific way that trained people go calm when the moment they train for finally arrives. The AI translation came through faster. This time you are outmatched. Stand down. We do not wish to destroy you. Surrender your vessels and your people will be treated according to hegemony protocols for uncontacted species. Torres read it aloud. Lieutenant Commander Chen, his tactical officer, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Hegemony protocols for uncontacted species, she repeated. That is a very polite phrase for something very ugly. It is, Torres agreed. He thought about the 40,000 people in this convoy. Families, children, farmers, and engineers and teachers who had saved for years for a spot on a colony ship, heading toward a new world and a new life. He thought about what hegemony protocols probably looked like in practice for species who did not comply. He keyed his transmitter. This is Fleet Commander Raphael Torres of the Earth Colonial Authority vessel New Carthage. You have entered engagement range of 17 armed vessels of the human colonial fleet. We are not surrendering. We are not powering down. If you fire on us, we fire back. That is the only message I have for you. He clicked off the transmitter. Chen, he said, what do we have? She did not hesitate. She had been running the numbers for the past 10 minutes. Point defense grids are hot across all 17 ships. Mac rounds loaded. Missile tubes warm. The lead Gulf and the Austerlitz are on our flanks with full combat loads. She paused. Sir, they have one ship. It is big, but it is one ship. Torres stood up from his command chair. He looked at the alien vessel on his screen. 4 km of metal and weapons, built by an empire that had been conquering species for longer than humanity had had writing. One ship sent to scare us into surrendering, he said. Standard intimidation works on species that have never had to fight for anything. He walked to the center of the bridge. Let's show them what it looks like when it doesn't work. The Eternal Dominion fired one warning shot, a low-power particle lance discharge. Vrethka aimed it past the human formation deliberately, a line of blue-white ionized gas that burned briefly across the vacuum and then faded, a demonstration of power, a kindness in the hegemony understanding. Of the word, it had always worked. Before, all 17 human ships opened fire. Simultaneously, Vrethkau's bridge erupted alerts, damage reports. The Dominion shuddered physically. Shuddered, a vibration he felt through the deck plates as human projectiles struck the forward hull, not energy. Weapons, chunks of metal accelerated too. High velocity, which was so primitive that the Dominion's automated defense systems had spent nearly 2 seconds trying to classify them as weapons at all, but there were a great many of them. Hull breach in forward section C, his damage officer reported. Sections D and E holding, external. Sensor array damaged, forward particle. Lance battery 2 is offline. Vrethk stared at his damage report. They had damaged his ship, these creatures in their antique vessels with their metal throwing weapons had breached the hull of a hegemony cruiser, full power to weapons, he said. What followed was not a battle. It was what happens when a warship built to fight other warships turns everything it has on vessels that had no business being in a fight at all. The particle lances fired, 6 human ships died in the first volley, clean kills. The beams punched through and the ships just stopped venting atmosphere and debris into the dark. 3 more lost engines spinning. The remaining 8 kept firing. Vrethka watched his damage reports. His hull was absorbing hits. The human weapons were doing almost nothing significant to his warship by every measurable standard. The fight was already over. The humans kept firing. He had expected them to run, he said, expected surrender or panic, or the frozen prey stillness that almost every species showed when facing overwhelming force. The humans did not run. They fired until 3 ships were left, then 2, then the new Carthage, alone pouring everything it had at the Dominion in a sustained and objectively pointless barrage that accomplished nothing except to leave burn marks on the exterior plating. Vrethka fired 1 lance shot at it. The new Carthage split open like a broken shell. The debris field spread slowly through the dark. 7 crippled ships drifted within range, still venting but intact. His sensors showed life signs in most of them. Silence. Send boarding parties to the intact vessels, Vrethka said. Take survivors alive. I want one brought to the interrogation suite. His science officer was very quiet. Commander, she said carefully, they knew they could not win. Yes, they knew from the first scan that our vessel was beyond their capability to destroy. Yes, and they still fought, he said. Nothing. He was looking at the debris field. I want to update my behavioral report on this species, she said. Vrethka kept his eyes on the wreckage of the new Carthage, a ship that had kept firing until the last possible second of its existence. He thought about that. He thought about it for a long time. So do I, he said. The survivor they pulled from the wreckage was a woman, one of the small ship commanders. Her vessel had lost its engines in the second volley but held its hull. She had a long cut above one eye from when her ship's gravity systems had failed during impact. Otherwise, she was uninjured. She sat in the interrogation chair and looked at the 4 hegemony officers in the room with no visible emotion, no shaking, no tears. She looked at Vrethka the same way he was looking at her, studying, taking notes. He sat across from her. She was smaller than he expected, soft-looking the way all humans appeared to a hegemony soldier. No exoskeleton, no plating, nothing but a thin layer of skin over a fragile bone. structure that his medical scanner described in terms that made her sound like she should not be alive, let alone sitting upright and looking at him. "You understand my translator?" he asked. "Well enough," she said. "You knew your ships could not defeat this vessel." She said nothing. "Your commander knew he told you, and you still fought." She looked at the wall for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes. When she looked back at him, he still could not name what it was. It was not bravery. He had catalogued bravery in 400 species, and it always looked like tension, like a body forcing itself to stay still. It was not defiance, which usually wore anger the way a coat wears its buttons. This was something else entirely. There were 40,000 people. That convoy, she said, families, kids. A pause. What were we supposed to do? Vrethka had no answer for that. He thought about the new Carthage firing until the moment it was destroyed. He thought about 17 colony ships, not warships, colony ships forming a defensive battle line in 2 minutes flat. "Where did you come from?" he asked. "Earth." "How many ships does Earth have?" She looked at him for a long moment. "You should be asking how many ships Earth has right now," she said, "because what you need to understand is that the ships you just destroyed are frontier vessels, colonial transport, light armament." She tilted her head slightly. "Earth's actual military has not left port yet." Vrethka went very still. "And when it does," she said, "what happened here today will look like a warm-up." She said it the way someone announces the weather, calm, matter-of-fact, like it was not a threat at all, like it was just information he needed. He filed his report to Hegemony Command that same hour. He listed the engagement. He listed the damage to the Dominion. He listed the number of human ships destroyed and the number of survivors taken. At the very end, he added one line. His superiors would later say they wish they had taken it more seriously. "These creatures do not behave like prey. Command should be advised before further actions taken." Hegemony Command received the report 6 days later. They read it. They called the prisoners words a bluff. They sent a war fleet 200 ships strong, and they told the admiral in charge that it would be a clean, fast operation, quick subjugation, standard protocol. Admiral's name was Keith Mora. He was confident. He had suppressed 9 species in his career. He had never lost a single major engagement. He had never met a human before. He was about to. Admiral Keith Mora's fleet came out of faster-than-light travel in a single coordinated burst, 200 warships dropping into real space simultaneously, which was the Hegemony's preferred opening statement. The visual alone was designed to end fights before they started. 200 ships, each one larger than anything humanity had put in space at that point, materializing out of nowhere in a tight formation that blocked out a section of stars. It had ended 14 wars without a shot being fired. Keith Mora stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Undying Authority, and looked at the space ahead of him. It was empty. He checked his scanners. Nothing. No human vessels, no colony ships, no military presence at all. Just a region of empty space, somewhere between the debris field from Commander Vrethkow's engagement and the inner boundary of what the humans apparently called the Sol System. "Where are they?" his tactical officer asked. Keith Mora was wondering the same thing. He had expected a response. Every species responded to 200 warships the same way, with fear and with desperate Communication signals please offers to negotiate the usual noise of a civilization suddenly understanding how small it was. Run a deep scan, he said. The scan ran. The scan found nothing. Cathmore awaited. His fleet drifted in formation through the dark. His officers ran checks and rechecks. 2 hours passed. 3. Then his long-range sensor operator said very quietly, "Admiral, something just came out of the asteroid belt." Not one thing. Many things. Rear Admiral Diana Voss had been waiting in the dark for 11 days. Her fleet was not the largest the Earth Defense Force had ever assembled. It was not even close to the largest. It was the fleet that had been close enough to respond when Hegemony Command sent its 200 ships toward human space, which meant it was assembled fast from whatever was available from the scattered garrisons and patrol groups and deep space stations that could be reached in time. 63 ships against 200. She sat in her command chair on the Unsk Thermopylae and watched the Hegemony fleet on her screens. She had given her ships 11 days inside the asteroid belt to finish power down protocols, to cool their drives, to go as dark as anything could go in space. 11 days of drifting among the rocks with engines cold and every non-essential system shut off. Waiting. The Hegemony fleet had not found them. Their scanners apparently were very good at finding things that were moving and producing energy. They were not built to find 63 ships playing dead inside an asteroid field. Voss allowed herself a small moment to be glad that humanity had spent so much of its history trying to kill other humans. The art of ambush was not new. The specific application was targets locked, she asked. Targets locked across all 63 ships, Commander Park said. Then let's go. The asteroid field lit up. Cathmore's fleet had been in combat for 4 minutes and was already on the wrong side of a disaster. The human ships had not appeared in front of his fleet. They had not appeared to the sides. They had appeared from behind, from inside an asteroid field that his long-range scanners had read as empty, and they had fired before his fleet completed its turn to face them. The first volley hit the rear third of his formation while his ships were still rotating. He lost 19 warships in the first 30 seconds. 19. The human weapons were not the primitive kinetic launchers from Commander Vreth Kaus' engagement report. These were his tactical officer was struggling to classify them in real time. Accelerated mass drivers operating at a scale that the Hegemony had no recorded equivalent for. They were shooting objects the size of ground vehicles at velocities that put the projectiles well past what his hull plating was rated to absorb, and there were missiles, hundreds of them. Smart missiles that did something his tactical computers initially flagged as an error before they confirmed it was intentional. The missiles were targeting specific systems on his ships, drive cores, weapon arrays, command bridges. The missiles were not simply trying to destroy, they were trying to disable in precise ways, which meant the humans had read his fleet's technical specifications and reverse-engineered targeting solutions in less than 2 weeks from a standing start. Return fire, Cathmore said. All batteries full spread. The undying authorities weapons opened up. 200 ships worth of particle lances and plasma batteries and mass drivers filled the space between the fleets with fire. The human ships moved. They moved in ways that made Kethmore's tactical computer flag, configuration error twice before it, accepted that what it was seeing was real human ships did not fly in straight lines or predictable arcs. They rotated on 3 axes simultaneously. They used their own damaged ships as cover. They fired while moving laterally at speeds his targeting systems were designed to account for but kept missing anyway because the humans were changing speed as well as direction in the same moment. His fleet was bigger, his fleet hit more often, his fleet was doing damage, but 63 human ships were eating 200 hegemony warships alive because the humans were fighting like they had invented the concept of fighting and had been practicing it every single day. Since how are they doing this? His science officer demanded. No one answered her. Admiral, his tactical officer said, and the quality of his voice was something Ketmura had never heard from him before. We have lost 41 ships 4 minutes and 11 seconds into the engagement. Voss watched her screens with the focused attention of someone doing a job they had been preparing to do for a long time. The hegemony fleet was massive. She was not pretending. Otherwise, her ships were taking damage. Real damage, serious damage. The Sussman had lost its forward hull section. The Midway was venting plasma from a drive hit and had dropped out of formation. 3 of her destroyers were gone, but the math was moving in the right direction. The humans had spent a very long time fighting each other. They had fought in every environment, under every condition, with every level of technology. From sticks to nuclear warheads, they had fought wars that lasted hours and wars that lasted centuries. They had developed doctrine and counter-doctrine and counter-doctrine in an endless cycle of mutual innovation that no other species in the galaxy had ever experienced, because no other species had spent 10,000 years in constant conflict with versions of itself. Hegemony warships were built on the assumption that the enemy would behave in a predictable way, because every enemy they had faced before had been predictable. Different biology, different technology, but the same basic decision-making process. When faced with superior firepower, the instinct to form up, to absorb damage from the front, to protect the center. Humans did not do that. Humans swarmed, humans split. Humans sent damaged ships forward as bait while intact ones flanked. Humans fired missiles in patterns that were only readable as patterns after the fact. When you were already burning, Ketmura's fleet was trying to fight a war. Voss's fleet was trying to solve a problem. The difference was not small. The Undying Authority is breaking formation, Commander Park reported. The hegemony flagship is pulling back. Don't let it go, Voss said. Ma'am, it has the speed advantage on. Don't let it go. I want that ship. Thermopylae swung hard to port and the pursuit began. Kethmore knew the engagement was lost. He had known it for 6 minutes already, but had been unwilling to say it, which was a form of cowardice. He would examine with great shame later. Assuming there was a later, he had lost 70 ships. He had killed 9 human vessels. 9. The numbers did not balance in any way that allowed for a good outcome. He ordered retreat. Most of his remaining fleet made it to FTL. Most, the Undying Authority, did not. The human flagship, the Thermopylae, he would learn later, named after a battle where 300 soldiers held a pass against a million invaders, ran down his flagship at the edge of the engagement zone. 2. Human destroyers cut off his FTL. Approach vector, a third put a salvo of. Mass driver rounds through his starboard. Engine section, the undying authority. Went dead in space when the human boarding parties came through his hull. Kethmore was on the bridge, standing at his station. Because there was nothing else to do, he had considered many things in the past. Few minutes, he had considered fighting. He had considered activating the ship's self-destruct, which was standard hegemony protocol for flagship capture. To prevent intelligence loss, he had not activated it. He was not sure why. Something had stopped him, something about the way this entire engagement had felt not like a battle but like a lesson, and the lesson was not finished. Yet the humans who came through his bridge door were not wearing what he expected. No power armor, no heavy weapons platforms, just soldiers in practical combat suits carrying weapons, efficiently moving with the specific economy of motion that marked people who had done something so times it had become automatic. One of them stopped in front of him. She was a woman, short hair, a thin scar on her jaw. Her weapon was pointed at the floor, not at him. "Admiral," she said through a translator, "I am Rear Admiral Diana Voss, Earth Defense Force. Your fleet has retreated. Your flagship is in our custody." She paused. "I am offering you a chance to speak with your government. Before we do anything else, I would like to avoid killing any more people on either side." Kethmaret looked at her for a long time. "You won this engagement," he said. "Finally, but the hegemony will send more ships, many more." "Yes," Voss said, "they will. You cannot win against the full strength of the hegemony fleet." "I don't need to win," she said. "I just need to make it cost enough that winning stops being worth it." She tilted her head. "Right now I need you to understand something important." She stepped slightly closer. "What you faced today was a frontier response. 63 ships pulled from patrol duty and garrison assignments. These are not our purpose-built warships. These are not our first-line fleet. These are not the ships that Earth keeps ready for a real war." Kethmaret said nothing. "The ship you just fought," she said, "these are the ships we have lying around." Silence on the bridge was absolute. Outside the viewports, the debris field from 112 hegemony warships drifted in a slow expanding cloud through the dark. 63 human patrol ships had done that in 11 minutes. The thought lodged itself in Kethmaret's mind like a splinter and would not come out. He transmitted his report to hegemony. "Command the following day from a cabin on the Thermopylae as a prisoner of war who had been given access to a communication array because the humans apparently saw no reason not to let him talk to his government." He listed everything: the ambush, the human tactics, the weapons, the losses. At the end, he wrote 3 words that had never appeared in a hegemony military report before: "We were outclassed." Hegemony command received the report and called an emergency session of the Supreme Council. 7 species that made up the hegemony's ruling body gathered in the great chamber on the capital world and talked for 2 days straight. They did not send another fleet. Instead, they sent a message to every member species of the Galactic Council requesting an emergency assembly. The message described the engagements with humanity. It described the losses. It asked a question that the hegemony had never had to ask before in 4 centuries of expansion. A question so alien to the hegemony way of thinking that several of the translators flagged It has a possible encoding error. What do we do within 48 hours? Representatives from 61 galactic civilizations were traveling to the council chamber, and someone somewhere had also sent a message to Earth. Earth had sent one person back, just one. The galactic council chamber on Velkareth was large enough to park a small moon inside, and had been designed with that specific sense of scale in mind. Its architects, 600 years ago, had wanted every species that entered to feel small, to feel that the galaxy was enormous and old, and that the council was the thing that held it together. It usually worked. The 61 delegations that gathered for the emergency assembly filled less than a third of the available space, and still the chamber felt crowded, humming with the specific anxious energy of a room full of intelligent beings who were all afraid of the same thing. At the center podium, Hegemony High Speaker Velthora opened the session. This council has been called, she said, because the eternal hegemony has encountered species that requires collective response. We have submitted the full record of both military engagements for council review. The documentation speaks for itself. It did. The chamber spent 4 hours watching footage. The Vethkari delegation watched in silence. The Vethkari were an old species, peaceful by nature, traders by preference. They had not fought a war in 800 years, and were quietly proud of that fact. They were also among the most analytically intelligent species in the council, and their lead delegate, a tall four-armed being named Austerlitz, had been watching the footage from Commander Vrethkos' scouting engagement with the specific focused attention of someone trying to understand something that did not quite fit into any available category. It was not the human weapons that disturbed her. It was the colony ships. They had not been warships. Scan data was clear on that. 17 transport vessels carrying civilian colonists equipped with minimal defensive armament facing a hegemony cruiser. The mathematical outcome was not a battle, it was a foregone conclusion, and they had still formed up, still fired, kept firing until the last ship was destroyed. Austerlitz had seen hegemony engagement records before. She had seen many species face the hegemony's initial contact protocol. Some fought, most surrendered or fled. Those that fought were usually military vessels operating on orders, acting out of duty rather than choice. The new Carthage had been a civilian fleet. Commander, the decision to fight had been made by one man on a colony ship in the middle of nowhere with 40,000 non-combatants in his care. She watched Taurus's final transmission again. If you fire on us, we fire back. 6 words. Flat delivery, no shaking, no elevation. In stress indicators that her reader could detect, like it was the only possible answer. Like anything else would have been strange. Across the chamber, the Rismoran delegation had spent the past hour in heated internal debate that their closed channel translator was doing its best to keep private. The Rismorans were not peaceful, they were not traitors, they were a warrior culture, proud of their military history, and they had watched the second engagement, Voss's 63 ships, against the 200 hegemony vessels, with a very different expression than most of the chamber. They used the asteroid field for cover for 11 days. Their lead delegate, Fleet Lord Harren, said for the 3rd time he kept coming back to it. 11 days with power down. Their crews function at combat. Effectiveness after 11 days of near total shutdown, the ambush formation was textbook, his tactical advisor said. No, Harun said. Textbook implies a text. They invented that formation in 2 weeks against an enemy they had never encountered before. He watched the footage of the Thermopylae running down the undying authority. They did not pursue the retreating fleet. No. They chose one target, the flagship. They ran it down specifically. He leaned forward. They wanted the admiral alive. They wanted him to report back. His tactical advisor was quiet for a moment. They were teaching the hegemony lesson. They were sending a message. Harun said everything about that engagement was a message. He watched the footage loop back to the beginning. 63 ships coming out of an asteroid field. First coordinated volley. 19 hegemony ships dead in 30 seconds. And the message was, we held back, he said. That last part very quietly. The rest of his delegation heard it anyway. The floor opened for debate after the footage review. 47 species attempted to speak within the first 10 minutes. The council moderator, a patient Delphine, who had been doing this job for 60 years and had the specific energy of someone who has survived many rooms full of panicking people, managed the queue with practiced efficiency. The debate had 3 broad positions. The first position was that the council should back the hegemony in a combined military response. Humans were clearly dangerous. Combined Galactic Council military strength represented forces from 61 civilizations. Even humanity's apparent capabilities would buckle under a truly unified response. This position had 14 supporters. It lost supporters steadily as the debate went on. The second position was immediate peaceful outreach. Humanity was young, frightened, and had responded to aggression with aggression, which was understandable. The hegemony had initiated the conflict by firing on a civilian convoy, perhaps an apology, followed by careful diplomatic engagement, could resolve the situation. This position had the most initial supporters. It also had a problem which the Rismoran Fleet Lord raised when he was given the floor. This council is proposing apologies and diplomatic engagement, he said, on the assumption that humanity is frightened, on the assumption that humanity fought back out of fear. He paused. I have watched the engagement records 11 times. I do not see fear anywhere in them. He looked around the chamber. The human commander was not afraid when he refused to stand down. He was not afraid when his ships were being destroyed. His people were not afraid when they kept firing from dying ships. Another pause. I think this council is misreading what kind of species we are dealing with. What kind do you think we are dealing with? The hegemony high speaker asked. Harun was quiet for a moment. He had been thinking about how to say this since the footage review ended. The kind, he said, that has been at war with itself for its entire history. The kind for which war is not an emergency, it is a normal condition. The kind that has had 10,000 years to get very, very good at something that most of the species in this chamber have not had to practice seriously in centuries. He set his hands flat on the table. We are not dealing with a frightened young species. We are dealing with a species that is by any honest military assessment currently better at warfare than anything in this chamber. He sat back. the question is not how to defeat them, the question is whether we want to try. The third position, which had been spoken quietly around the edges of the debate and which now moved to the center, was this: talk to them but do it carefully. The human delegation arrived on the third day, one person. The chamber held its collective breath. When the human walked through the main entrance, the Galactic Council had sent formal diplomatic protocols, invitations, a full honor guard, and requests for delegation credentials. They had expected a delegation, a team, specialist, the standard apparatus of interstellar diplomacy. They got Margaret Osi. She was 73 years old. She walked with a slight limp that she had acquired in a ground war 40 years ago in a conflict that had since been resolved on a continent she had not been born on. She had spent 22 years as a combat officer and 30 years as a diplomat, which she considered to be the same job, done at different speeds. She wore a plain gray jacket, no medals though she had many. She carried a small bag and a data pad and nothing else. She walked to the human delegation's assigned position in the chamber floor, set down her bag, and looked up at the 61 species staring at her. Shall we begin? She said. Hegemony High Speaker addressed her. First, Ambassador OSI, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I'm not an ambassador, Margaret said pleasantly. I'm an envoy. There's a difference. An ambassador has the authority to make binding commitments on behalf of her government. An envoy carries a message and listens to messages in return. She set her data pad on the table. Earth sent me to listen and to deliver a message. Whether anything comes after that depends entirely on what I hear. Silence. What is Earth's message? The High Speaker asked. Margaret opened her data pad. She read from it without theater. Earth notes that the eternal hegemony fired on an unarmed civilian convoy without provocation. Earth notes that this action resulted in the deaths of 6,412 human civilians. Earth notes that a subsequent hegemony military fleet of 200 warships entered human adjacent space with clearly hostile intent. Earth notes that this fleet was neutralized by Earth Defense Force units at a cost of 309 human military personnel. She looked up from the pad. Earth position is this: the hegemony will acknowledge its unprovoked attack on human civilians. The hegemony will pay reparations to the families of those killed. The hegemony will formally recognize human territorial rights in all currently and previously inhabited human space. She closed the pad. In return, Earth will consider this matter resolved and will not pursue further military action. She looked up at the hegemony delegation. Specifically, those are Earth's terms. They are not a starting position for negotiation. They are the terms. The High Speaker's expression was something between outrage and careful calculation. You speak of reparations and acknowledgement to the most powerful empire in this galaxy as though you are the party with leverage. Margaret tilted her head. I am the hegemony has thousands of warships. Earth has. We destroyed 112 of your warships in 11 minutes with 63 ships pulled from patrol duty, Margaret said. She said it the way you point out a mistake on a bill. Calm. Precise. I have the exact figures if you need them. She looked around the chamber. This council has spent 3 days trying to figure out what to do about humanity. You are afraid of what we might do if pushed. That fear is not Irrational, she folded her hands on the table. The question you should be asking is not what happens if you refuse our terms. You know what happens if you refuse our terms. The question you should be asking is why we are offering terms at all. The chamber was very quiet because we don't want a war. Margaret said, we have never wanted a war. We would like to join this council as equal members, trade with your civilizations, explore our galaxy, and raise our children in something resembling peace. She paused. But if you make war on us, we will fight. We will fight the way we have always fought. And what you have seen so far, 63 ships, patrol fleet, is not the war we are capable of fighting. She let that sit for a moment. Accept the terms. This ends here for everyone's benefit. Hegemony High Speaker leaned forward. And if we refuse, Margaret picked up her bag. Then I go home, she said, and Earth stops asking. She left the chamber that evening. Council debated for 2 more days. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Hegemony Council voted. They rejected the terms. The vote was closer than the High Speaker would ever publicly admit. 14 members voted to accept. The rest voted against, driven by pride and by the deep institutional certainty of an empire that had never lost a war, that had absorbed 400 species into its structure, that could not physiologically process the idea of paying reparations to a species they had never heard of 18 months ago. Decision went out to all member fleets. Full mobilization. 10,000 warships designated for the solar system. Operation, the largest military action in hegemony history. No more patrol fleets, no more frontier engagements, no more lessons. This time they were going to end it. Margaret O'Shea received the news on her transport ship en route back to Earth. She sat with it for a long time, then she sent a single coded message ahead to Earth Defense Command. 4 words. They said no. Prepared. She watched the stars move outside her viewport and felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite relief. Something in between, the feeling of a door that had been open for a while, finally closing. Earth had known this was possible. Earth had prepared for this. The hegemony did not know what Earth had prepared. Nobody in the galaxy did. That was, Margaret reflected, going to be a very unpleasant surprise. 10,000 ships. Supreme Fleet Commander Drachval had never commanded anything close to that number. No one in hegemony history had. The largest fleet operation in recorded galactic history before this moment had been the 7th expansion campaign, which had deployed 4,000 vessels and brought 11 species into the hegemony in under a decade. This was more than twice that. Drachval stood at the command center of the Eternal Throne, the hegemony's most powerful warship, and looked at his fleet spread across his screens in a formation so large it took 4 separate display panels to show at once 10,000 warships, organized into 40 battle groups, each group capable of independently reducing a planetary surface to rubble. They had spent 4 months assembling this fleet, 4 months of recalls and requisitions and acceleration of the shipyard programs, and stripping garrisons from member worlds and pulling reserve vessels out of long-term storage and reactivating them. The hegemony had moved with a speed and coordination it had not shown in centuries, driven by something that the council chamber debates had politely called strategic urgency, and that the soldiers called by its real name, fear. Set course for the Sol system, Drath. Fell said 10,000 ships moved. The Sol system was 8 light-years away. They arrived in stages over 6 hours because even the hegemony's best FTL coordination could not keep 10,000 ships synchronized over that distance. Battle groups dropped into real space in sequencer, each one checking in, each one reporting position and status before the next came through. By the time the final battle group arrived, Drath Fell's advanced units had been in the Sol system for 2 hours. They had not found what they expected. What they expected was a civilization in the early stages of space flight clustered around a single star with the kind of orbital infrastructure that a species typically builds in its first century of serious space development. A few stations, some mining platforms, a small number of warships clustered defensively around the home world. What they found was a solar system that had been turned into a weapon. Earth had seen this coming, not the specific date or the specific number of ships, but the shape of it. A large force, a terminal engagement, an attempt to end the conflict with overwhelming mass. Earth strategic analysts had been running models since Commander Vrethkow's first engagement report had been recovered from a destroyed human ship and passed along by an intelligence contact in the Galactic Council. The models had converged on the same basic answer. Within weeks, the hegemony would send everything, so Earth had done the same. The Earth Defense Force had been quietly existing for 240 years. It had been built, expanded, reduced, rebuilt, argued over, defunded, refunded, and shaped by every major human conflict and every period of human peace in the 2.5 centuries since humanity had first looked up at the stars and realized that whatever was up there might not be friendly. It was the product of a species that had been at war in some form for its entire recorded history, and which had decided when it finally had the technology to think about galactic scale threats to take that history seriously. What the hegemony's advanced units found as they spread through the outer solar system was not a defense, it was infrastructure. The difference was important. A defense is something you build when you think an attack is coming. Infrastructure is something you build because it is always there. Automated weapons platforms in the UIT cloud, layered sensor nets that had detected the hegemony fleet's FTL approach 6 hours before the first ship arrived. Mass driver arrays mounted on asteroids, on moons, on orbital stations, running through the entire system on arcing orbital paths that put them in firing position on any approach vector. Rail gun installations on the surface of every rocky body larger than 50 km. Drone carrier stations positioned at the L4 and L5 points of every major planet, each one holding thousands of combat drones on standby power. And then there were the ships. Fleet Admiral James Akefer, Yale's father, though he did not allow that fact to mean anything in professional settings, sat on the bridge of the EDF Dunkirk and watched the hegemony fleet materialize on his screens. He had been watching them come in for 2 hours. 10,000 ships. He had known the number was coming. His analysts had predicted it within 10% accuracy based on the hegemony's known shipyard capacity. He had planned for it. He had built his response around it. He had also, in the private hours of his own mind, felt the weight of it. 10,000 ships was not a number that fit inside a normal human intuition of military force. It was the kind of number that lived in history books. It was the kind of number that meant something on an existential level. Akeffer had spent 30 years preparing for an existential engagement. How are we on deployment? He asked. Battle groups Alpha through Delta are positioned at the inner system line, his tactical commander Vice Admiral Santos said. Echo through Kilo are at the outer asteroid belt. Omega group is at the order array. She paused. The hegemony's advanced units have already triggered the first 3 automated sensor rings. They know we know they're here. Good, Akeffer said. I want them to know. Drone arrays hold until I give the word. Understood. Pause. Sir, they outnumber us 14-1. Akeffer looked at his screens. They outnumber the ships they can see, he said. What's on the drone manifest? 1.2 million combat drones across all arrays. What about the lunar installations? Hot and locked. Titan platforms online and at 98%. The order array ready on your command. Akeffer leaned back. What's the hegemony formation doing? Advancing. Main body is still deploying from FTL. Leading units are moving toward the outer asteroid belt. Santos studied her screens. They're moving confidently. I don't think they've found the drone arrays yet. They won't, Akeffer said, until we turn them on. Supreme Fleet Commander Draffel did not understand what he was looking at. His advanced units had reached the outer asteroid belt and found human warships waiting for them. That was expected. The human warships were larger than the patrol vessels from the previous engagements. Purpose-built military ships, well armed, and there were roughly 700 of them spread across the inner asteroid belt in a wide defensive screen. 700. He had 10,000 ships. Begin the engagement, he said. Standard formation. Push through the asteroid belt line and advance to the inner system. His leading battle groups moved forward. Then the asteroid belt moved, not metaphorically, not in a way that could be described as anything other than what it was. 3,000 asteroids ranging in size, from boulders to small mountains, fired simultaneously. A coordinated volley of kinetic masses that had been positioned on precise orbital paths years ago, aimed at approach vectors that humanity had calculated a hegemony fleet would use, launched by remote signal from Earth Defense Command. Drathfel watched his tactical display turn into a red cascade. Point defense. Cannot track that many individual objects simultaneously, his tactical officer said. He was not panicking. He was simply reporting. There are too many. They are too fast. They are coming from too many angles. 3 minutes after the asteroid belt fired, Drathfel had lost 411 ships. He had not lost a single ship to the human warships. Yet he had lost them to rocks. Santos watched the first wave hit. Drone array, she said. Launch. 1,200,000 combat drones came online simultaneously across the entire Sol system. They were small. By hegemony warship standards, they were almost nothing. 2 m long, shaped like elongated cylinders carrying a single kinetic penetrator round and enough drive capacity for one high-speed attack run. They were not individually impressive. 1,200,000 of them launched in a synchronized swarm across a battle space spanning the entire inner solar system were something else. They were coordinated. They were smart, not Intelligent but programmed with targeting logic that prioritized drive. Systems and weapon arrays, the same. Targeting philosophy that Rear Admiral Voss's fleet had pioneered in the previous engagement now applied at a scale that made that engagement look like a preliminary sketch. They were also expendable, which meant they went places and did things that crewed ships would not. The hegemony fleet's point. Defense systems were already strained. From the asteroid strike, they had been designed to handle saturation attacks. But they had been designed to handle saturation attacks from a single direction because no adversary in hegemony military history had ever managed to mount a saturation attack from all directions simultaneously. Darth Vader's fleet had its back to the outer system, its flanks to the asteroid belt, and its front to the inner system, where the human warships were now advancing. The drones came from all four directions and from above and from below the ecliptic plane and from inside the asteroid belt itself, where arrays had been hidden inside the larger rocks. He lost 2,000 ships in the drone wave. His fleet had not reached the inner solar system yet. The battle took 11 hours. It had a shape, a terrible complex shape, that would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries afterward. The human fleet did not fight a single battle, it fought 40 separate engagements simultaneously, each one precisely coordinated with the others, each one designed to push the hegemony fleet into specific positions, where the next wave of fire was already waiting. Akefer directed from the Dunkirk with the quiet focus of a man doing extremely difficult work that he had been trained to do. He lost ships. He lost people. Every name on the casualty list was a name he would read later in private, because that was how he had always handled it, not as numbers, as names, but the math moved in one direction. The Titan platforms fired at Hour 3, adding the outer planet's moon base mass drivers to the engagement. The Order Ray fired at Hour 7, catching the hegemony's reserve battle groups as they tried to hold position beyond the main engagement zone. Akefer's shipboard fleet pushed into the hegemony's main body at Hour 9, when the hegemony formation had been broken by 6 hours of automated fire into disconnected clusters that could no longer support each other. At Hour 11, Supreme Fleet Commander Darth Vader aboard the Eternal Throne did the mathematics. He had arrived with 10,000 ships. He had approximately 1,200 left. They were scattered across the solar system. They were damaged. They were out of coordinated formation for the first time since the battle began. The human warships were between them and the outer system. The automated platforms were between them and any clear FTL vector. He had been in space for 11 hours and he was inside the Sol system with no clear way out, and 1,200 ships against a human fleet that was still largely intact, and an automated defensive network that had not run out of ammunition. He sent a message to Earth Defense Command. He asked for terms. The response came back in 40 minutes. It was not Margaret Ose. This time, it was James Akefer speaking from the bridge of his ship, surrounded by the sounds of a fleet that had just fought for 11 hours and was still running hot. Supreme Fleet Commander Drafel Akefer said he was tired. He looked it. He did not pretend otherwise. I'm accepting your request for terms. Your remaining vessels will power down weapons and hold position. I'll have Transport vessels at your location. Within 4 hours to begin evacuation of. You're wounded. Any ship that fires while waiting will not receive this offer. Again he paused. I want to be clear about something, he said. This battle is over. This war is over. What you experienced today was the Sol system's permanent defensive infrastructure. What we have built here over 2 centuries and keep ready at all times. Another pause. It is not the sum total of Earth's military capacity. It is not close to the sum total of Earth's military capacity. He looked at the camera. What you saw today is what we do to protect one planet, what we are capable of doing beyond this system. That is a different number entirely. He let that land. Power down your weapons. Let us get your wounded. And then the hegemony is going to want to reconsider the terms Ambassador Osa offered. He clicked off. Drafel sat in silence for a long moment. 1,200 ships out of 10,000, and the human had just told him this was just the defense of one planet. He powered down his weapons. He sent the order to his fleet, and he began to understand in a way that felt like the ground disappearing from under his feet, that the hegemony had not been fighting a young frightened species that was punching above its weight. It had been fighting a species that was fighting below its ceiling. There was a very large difference between those two things. He was only beginning to understand how large the galaxy learned in pieces. It did not learn all at once, the way you might expect news of a civilization-altering event to travel. It learned the way news actually travels, in fragments, in rumors, messages that arrived out of order, in second-hand accounts from ship crews who had been near the Sol system and picked up signal traffic that they couldn't quite believe they were reading. Hegemony Supreme Fleet loses engagement. In Sol system, 10,000 vessels deployed. 1,200 returned. Armistice requested. Terms under discussion. That was the first fragment that reached the Galactic Council. It took most of the receiving species about 4 hours to process the number. Some of them ran the math more than once, certain they had made an error. 10,000 ships, 1,200 returned. The hegemony had lost 88% of its largest fleet action in history in 11 hours. Against one planet, the armistice talks happened on neutral ground, a station orbiting a small star between human space and hegemony territory, chosen because it belonged to neither and was far enough from both that no one could argue it was an act of pressure. The hegemony sent 9 delegates. Earth sent 2. Margaret O'Connell was one of them. She walked into the room with the same gray jacket and the same data pad she had carried at the Galactic Council. She sat down across from the hegemony delegation and looked at the faces of people who had been running an empire for 4 centuries and who were, for the first time in that history, sitting on the side of the table that asked for terms instead of delivering them. She did not allow herself to feel satisfaction about this. She had learned in 30 years of diplomacy that the moment you started enjoying the other side's discomfort was the moment you started making bad decisions. You know what Earth wants, she said. High Speaker Vel Thara, who had replaced the previous High Speaker after the Sol engagement, looked older than she had at the Galactic Council. Not physically older, just worn. The previous terms, she said. Previous terms, Margaret confirmed. Acknowledgement of unprovoked aggression, reparations to the families Of the colony convoy dead, formal. Recognition of human territorial rights. She paused, and one addition. What addition? A formal agreement that the hegemony will not conduct first contact operations in unclaimed space. Operations of any kind without first consulting the Galactic Council. You don't get to claim territory and inform the species living there after the fact anymore. Margaret set her data pad on the table. That's not a renegotiation of the terms, it's the updated terms. Vel. Thara was quiet for a moment. You are asking us to change the way we have operated for 4 centuries. Yes, on the basis of one conflict, on the basis of common decency, Margaret said. Without heat. The conflict is just the reason you're finally listening. The talks lasted 3 days. The hegemony delegation argued about wording and scope and implementation timelines. Margaret and her colleague, a younger diplomat named Adami, who had the particular skill of being able to negotiate without his face ever giving anything away, moved through each point. Methodically, patient as water. On the 4th morning, the hegemony delegation signed. Word reached the Galactic Council in full on the day the armistice was announced. The chamber that had been so full of anxious noise 3 months earlier was different now, quieter. The representatives of 61 species sat with the specific stillness of people who had been given a great deal of new information and were still processing it. Austere and of the had been running calculations since the first reports came in. She pulled up the numbers again. 10,000 ships against one planet's defenses. She thought about the colony convoy, 17 civilian ships forming a battle line. She thought about 63 patrol vessels running down 200 hegemony warships. She thought about what fleet Lord Heron had said in this very chamber. I don't see fear anywhere in them. She had been thinking about that for months. She had been thinking about why she was Vethchari. She had a deep practice capacity for understanding psychology across species lines, for reading the emotional logic behind observed behavior. She had 800 years of species interaction in her cultural history to draw on. She had not been able to explain the absence of fear. Now sitting with the full picture, she thought she finally understood. It was not that humans lacked fear. Every species with a functional survival response felt fear. It was that humans had spent so much time in environments where fear was not the useful response that they had learned deeply, culturally, generationally, to do something else. With it, they converted it. Fear went in, action came out, not a suppression, not a performance of bravery, a literal metabolic conversion trained into them by 10,000 years of being one of the most conflict-laden species in the galaxies. History. The colony convoy commander had been afraid. Akafor had been afraid in the Sol battle. Voss had been afraid. Facing 200 ships with 63, they had all been afraid, and they had all done the same thing with it. They had aimed it. Fleet Lord Heron of the Rismoran delegation requested a private meeting with the human diplomatic team the day after the armistice announcement. He met with Adami in a small conference room. He came alone. He sat down and looked at the young human diplomat across the table and was quiet for a moment before he said what he had come to say. I want to understand the number, he said. Adami waited. 10,000 ships came to Sol. 1,200 survived. This is being described in the hegemony's official communications as an unexpected defeat caused by fortified planetary defenses. Heron set his hands on the table. I am a military man. I spent 40 years in the Rismoran fleet before I became a diplomat. I understand fortified planetary defenses. He looked at Adeyemi steadily. What I do not understand is how one planet's defenses destroyed 88% of the largest fleet in hegemony. History, planets do not do that. Planets absorb bombardment. Planets do not go on the offensive into the middle of an incoming fleet and tear it apart. Adeyemi said nothing. The automated platforms, the drone arrays, the asteroid systems, those are not built in 3 months. Those are not built in 3 years. Harun leaned forward slightly. How long have you been building? Pause. How long do you think? Adeyemi asked. Harun did the math. Population, growth curves, infrastructure capacity, estimates, the sheer scale of what had been revealed in the Sol engagement, the number of installations, the volume of automated systems, the complexity of their coordination. 2 centuries, he said, at minimum. 240 years, Adeyemi said. Harun sat back. You have been preparing for a galactic-level conflict. For 240 years, we have been preparing for the possibility of one, Adeyemi said. There is a difference. What triggered it? 240 years ago, what made Earth start building? Adeyemi was quiet. For a moment, we figured out we were not alone, he said. We picked up electromagnetic signals from civilizations and other systems. We did not know what those civilizations were like. We did not know if they were peaceful or hostile. We knew only that they were there and that the galaxy was very large and that we were very small. A pause. Earth had a long history of what happens when a more technologically advanced civilization encounters a less advanced one. We did not want to be on the wrong side of that equation. So you built, Harun said. We built, Adeyemi said, for 240 years while also maintaining normal civilian development. Trade, science, art, medicine. A slight pause. We are very good at doing multiple things at once. Heron was quiet. For a long time, the solar system defenses, he said finally. The platforms, the arrays, that is Earth's defensive infrastructure. What about your offensive infrastructure? Adeyemi did not answer. His not answer was an answer. Heron sat with it. He thought about the colony convoy, the first engagement, the very first thing the hegemony had encountered. 17 civilian ships, and those civilian ships had been armed minimally, yes, but armed. The colonists on those ships had been traveling to establish a new world, and they had brought weapons because bringing weapons was apparently something humans did as a matter of course, the way other species packed provisions. He thought about the 63 patrol vessels that had destroyed 112 hegemony warships, patrol vessels, ships whose primary purpose was to make sure nobody was causing problems in human adjacent space. He thought about Sol, a fortress of a solar system that had been under construction for 2.5 centuries. He thought about the word offensive. I think, Heron said slowly, that I would like to recommend to the Rixmorix government that we pursue a very warm and genuine friendship with humanity. Adeyemi smiled for the first time in the conversation. That would be appreciated. The hegemony changed after the armistice, not overnight. Empires do not change overnight, but the council that had voted 14 to 47 against accepting Earth's terms 3 months earlier, voted differently now. The same council that had authorized 10,000 ships now authorized a cultural exchange program. The species that had built their identity on expansion and subjugation began slowly and with many internal arguments the long process of examining what that identity had cost them, not because they had become better people overnight, because they had encountered something that made the old way too expensive to continue. Humanity joined the Galactic Council formally 6 months after the armistice. Margaret O'Shea took the human seat in the chamber and sat in it with the specific calm of someone who had been doing hard things for a very long time and for whom this particular hard thing was finished. She gave a short speech. She said that Earth did not want to be feared. She said that Earth wanted to trade and explore and learn and contribute to a galactic community that was better for every species in it. She said that humanity had built what it had built not out of aggression but out of caution, because caution was what a small species did when it looked at a large universe and decided to take its chances. She said, "One more thing, the hegemony encountered our colony fleet first." She said, "Those 17 ships, those 40,000 people, that was not a military operation. That was ordinary people going to build a new home." She looked around the chamber. The hegemony attacked them because they could, because the hegemony's entire framework was built on the idea that capability confers right, that if you are strong enough to take something, you may take it. She paused. Earth's framework is different. We are strong. We have been building strength for 240 years. We are not ashamed of that, but strength is not permission, it is responsibility. Another pause. We would like to help this council build something that reflects that idea. We are willing to work very hard toward that goal. A final pause. We are very good at working hard. There was no applause in the chamber. The species present did not all share the same customs around that, but there was something else. Particular quality of attention, a collective settling, a room of 61 civilizations receiving a piece of information and beginning slowly to understand what it meant. Austerlitz walked out of the council chamber into the long corridor that ran along the exterior of the station, a transparent wall on one side looking out at the star field, and she stood there for a while. She thought about the full shape of it. Now, she thought about a species that had picked up radio signals from stars and decided in the long, careful, institutional way of a civilization, thinking across generations, that it was going to take the galaxy seriously, that had built for 240 years in parallel with living, not instead of living, not in sacrifice of everything else, but alongside it, quietly, persistently, with the specific determination of a people who had already learned every lesson about what happens to those who are not prepared. She thought about the colony convoy. She thought about what it meant that those civilian ships had been armed. She thought about what it meant that Rear Admiral Voss had run the undying authority down, not to destroy it but to take the admiral alive, to send a message. She thought about what it meant that Earth had deployed 63 patrol ships against 200 hegemony warships in one, and that the Earth Defense Force's full front-line fleet had not moved at all, had stayed in position, had watched, had been waiting to see if it would be necessary. It had not been necessary. That was austere and thought the most important detail of everything she had witnessed, not the weapons, not the platforms, not the drones or the asteroid arrays or the Titan installations. The most important detail was what Earth had not deployed. The hegemony had sent 10,000 ships to end a civilization. Earth had ended the engagement with the tools it kept for ordinary defense, and the rest, the ships, the stations, the full industrial military infrastructure of a species that had been quietly building toward galactic scale conflict for nearly 2.5 centuries had stayed home, waiting, ready, not afraid. She thought about Margaret O'Connell walking into the Galactic Council with a gray jacket and a data pad. One person, one message. Accept the terms. This ends here. Hegemony had said no. They had found out. What no cost? She looked at the stars for a long time, then she went back inside because there was work to do. The slow, grinding, important work of building something better out of what had happened, the work that the galaxy would be doing for a very long time. On the other side of the galaxy, 8 light years from Velcarath, in a solar system that had just finished patching hull damage on several hundred platforms and recalibrating several thousand drones, Earth Defense Command filed its post-engagement assessment. The document was long. Its final paragraph was short. All system defenses performed within projected parameters. Fleet performance exceeded projections. Losses are within acceptable range. Note for strategic review: the hegemony fleet engaged represents approximately 12% of estimated hegemony total military capacity. Earth's response engaged approximately 18% of Sol system defensive capacity. Frontline offensive fleet was not required. Strategic reserves were not activated. Earth's full wartime production capacity was not initiated. A brief pause in the way that official documents pause. Recommend maintaining current readiness posture. The galaxy has learned that humanity will defend itself. The galaxy has not yet learned the full extent of what that means. It does not need to for now.